Morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Community Church. We're a welcoming congregation where we strive to transform ourselves and the world through love, wonder, and connection. My name is Elena Brooks Perkins. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve on the worship committee, the nominating committee. I sing in the choir, and I also bake for the bake sale, which is today. So I hope that you will indulge after the service. Adina has an announcement that she's going to make, and I'm going to talk really slowly so she can get up here.
Sometimes it comes faster than you think. And other things have come faster than we thought. As many of you may know, our beloved Raymond Cady, our office administrator, will be taking a position in a church of his own denomination after November 29th of this year. And we will miss him terribly, and we are proud and supportive of these next steps for him. For more information and for Raymond's own words, there was a special email sent out, so you can look for that to read that for yourself. We're wanting to shower Raymond with appreciation and support and what this church does best, love. So on Sunday, 24th, we'll have a reception after the service to thank Raymond. We invite you, if you are so moved, to send a short video of gratitude or goodbye for Raymond, and we will compile those. You can send those to Reverend Sarah by November 25th, so it doesn't have to be before the service. He'll get it after the service, if that makes sense. If you can't send a video, you don't know how to record a video, it's totally okay. We have an iPad and a setup in Reverend Sarah's office, so you can record one today or next week if you would like. We're also going to start a thank you sign. I say card, but it's pretty big in our e-class today, and you can have an opportunity to add your name or a note to that. So please do that. So it's not just a giant piece of white paper, but it's full of lots of love from us. Raymond has journeyed with us for 8 years. So let's send him on the next part of his journey with lots of love. Thank you.
Thank you, Adina. Whether you are here for the first time or the thousandth time, welcome. Wherever you are, whatever you are facing in your own life, welcome. This is a place where we try our best to be real with one another, to get through hard things together, and to remind ourselves and one another of the values that ground and center us, that motivate and move us. Whoever you are, whatever your faith journey, whomever you love, you are welcome here. We welcome all who seek to know the sacred and all who seek to make our world more just. Our commitment is to be together in covenant, so please join me in our affirmation of who this community is, beginning with that all-important word. Love is the message of this church, and service is our way. This is our great covenant together, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Let's join in singing our opening hymn, Comfort Me, number 1002, in our teal softcover hymnal. Yeah, please stand if you are able. Thank you. You may be seated. We'll now say our chalice lighting words by Sunshine Jeremiah Wolf as Helen lights our chalice. On this Transgender Day of Remembrance, we remember those who have been murdered for who they are, those who face violence on a daily basis, those who have lost loved ones, and those who worry for loved ones. May we come to a time when we cease to shame children around gender roles and expression, where we allow for freedom and exploration of identity and expression, and to a world that operates from love, especially when things are difficult and confusing. May all of us live with the threat of violence find support, strength, community, hope, and safety. Is it your time? No. I was like, I don't. Okay, great. Please join me now in a time of meditation and prayer. Find a comfortable place for your body, noticing your breathing, finding your center. Take a moment to just be. Allow the stillness to settle in. We love and remember our trans siblings stolen from us this year. We love and remember all of our ancestors stolen from us throughout time and space. Our hearts are broken. May we find the community, keep giving, keep loving, keep living. Let us, life, soul, love, we call out to you in our grief and our rage. We call out to you in our terror and our exhaustion. Please help us to gather ourselves together and to each other. Give us strength, give us comfort, give us care. Life, soul, love, we call out to you in our need for support and change. We call out to you in our dreams and wishes. Please help us survive. Please change the hearts and souls of those who directly bring us harm. Please change the hearts and souls of those who allow harm to come to us through their absence. Life, soul, love, we call out to you in our sacred wholeness. We call out to you in our full humanity. Please sustain us as we love and fight for ourselves and our trans siblings right now and always. Please bring us to a day when we may live whole and sacred, reasonably safe in the great wide world. Thank you.
As we come together every Sunday from our own separate lives and in our own separate homes, we bring with us a variety of joys and sorrows, fears and hopes. We take time in our service now to honor those big feelings together. We share this time as a contemplative time, each of us given an opportunity to share within the community what lifts us up and what weighs us down. Today, we will light candles of joy and hope to lift up the bright things in our lives, and we will also place stones to hold our sorrows and fears and to ease the weight from our spirits. In a moment, folks will be invited to come forward, but first, those online are welcome to put their names in the chat and if they would like a stone or a candle to participate in our ritual. If you are in the room and you would like someone to light a candle for your joy rather than come forward, please raise your hand. There's another over here. Got one right here. And one more, yeah. Sarah's would all like a candle for 2 granddaughters. And now, if you would like a stone placed for your sorrow, please raise your hand. Start from the back, yeah. One over here. Okay. Anyone who would like to come forward may do so now, around the outsides and through the middle. place one final stone making sorrows this morning. Please join in our sung prayer response, There is Love. Hi there. My name is Adina Danouf. I use she or they pronouns, and I am your director of Lifespan Religious Exploration. And I have a question for you today. Do you know who you are? Raise your hand if the answer is yes, maybe. Okay. I'm glad to see that many of you might know. It's okay if you didn't raise your hand, because sometimes, a lot of the times, most times, we have to figure it out, right? Sometimes what happens when you're trying to figure it out is people try to tell us who we are, right? And that makes listening to your own voice really hard. This story is kind of about that. It is called Red, A Crown Story by Michael Hall. And we'll go to the next slide. He was red. Now, if you take a very close look right there, what you see is going to be important. So I see a pencil and a red crayon. You might have some feelings about the top of that crayon. Keep that in mind, okay? So we'll go to the next slide. He was red, but he wasn't very good at it. What do we see here? A blue fire engine, right? And he said, oh dear. Next slide. Now, his teacher thought he needed more practice. I'll draw a red strawberry, and then you draw a red strawberry. You can do this, really. And what happened on the next slide? But he couldn't, really. Like this? He asked. Oh my, let's try again. Those are blue strawberries for those who can't see. Next slide. Yes. His mother thought he needed to mix with other colors. Why don't you two go out and draw a nice round orange? So we have our red crown and we have a yellow crayon here. Let's see what happens. A really big one, a really orange one, they say. And then they made a greenish one. Do you want to eat a greenish orange? No. Yuck. Okay, what happens next? His grandparents thought he wasn't warm enough. Your class is making self-portraits for Parents' Night. Wear this nice, warm scarf. Nice. It's so you. So they put a red scarf on our red crayon. And what happens? Here are some self-portraits here. The scarf wasn't so you. Oh, dear me. So we can't quite see it, but there's lots of wonderful self-portraits here. And then right there in the middle is the red crayon self-portrait with the red scarf on. Are you seeing it? Yeah. It's blue. Okay. Next slide. Everybody seemed to have something to say. Sometimes I wonder if he's really red at all. Now don't be silly. It says red on his label. He came that way from the factory. Frankly, I don't think he's very bright. Well, I think he's lazy. Really, he's got to press harder. Really apply himself. Give him time, he'll catch on. Of course he will. Sometimes crayons have a lot to say, right? But he didn't catch on. We see green frog, black sheep, brown cow, and a red ant. It's blue. What happens next? Well, the art supplies, they wanted to help, and the masking tape thought maybe he was broken inside, so this will help hold you together. And the scissors thought maybe his label was just on too tight. One snip should do it. I thought he wasn't sharp enough. Stay still now. That's a sharpener. Then what happens? But even with all of our help and all of his hard work, we've got blue hearts, blue cherry, blue foxes, and blue fingered toenails. Toenails, yes. He just, next slide, couldn't get the hang of it. That is a traffic light with a very unread top. Next. And one day, he met a friend. The friend said, "Will you make a blue ocean for my boat?" And together, Red said, "I can't, I'm red." And the new friend said, "Will you try?" What happens? So he did. For those who can't see, it is a blue sea with a purple boat. "Thank you," the new friend says, "it's perfect." And Blue says, Red says, they say, "You're welcome. It was easy." And then all these other crowns had things to say. He was blue, and everyone was talking. "My son is brilliant. Who could have ever known he was blue? I always said he was blue. It was obvious. His blue ocean really lifted me. All of his work makes me happy. His blue strawberries are my favorite. He's so intense. I'm going to make a green lizard with him, a really big one. I hear he's working on a new huge project." And he didn't stop there. We've got blue jeans, blue bells, blue whales, everything blue. He says, "I'm blue." Next slide. He's really reaching for the sky, and he really was. So my hope is that this week you find an opportunity too to reach for the sky by just being you. Maybe by just being blue. Let's head to class.
I am much shorter. Please join me in our offering this morning and acknowledging all the ways we give to this church and the world. We give because this is our church. We value what it does for us, to us, and through us, to our community and our world. May there be an offering to sustain and grow the mission of this church, inside and outside our walls. May we give in love and hope. Thank you for your offering and all the ways you give to our life and ministry with your time, talent, treasure, and trust. Together, our gifts allow us to expand and strengthen the tapestry of love, wonder, and connection that blesses this church and transforms us and the world. Our reading this morning is a responsive reading from Religious Institute, a multi-faith organization dedicated to advocating for sexual, gender, and reproductive health, education, and justice in faith communities and society. I invite you to join me for the parts in italics. We are grateful for the gift of our lives and the gift of other people in our lives. We are called to love one another and to do nothing to others that we would find hateful to ourselves. We honor the many ways that people live and love. Our common life is enriched when queer, transgender, bisexual, lesbian, and gay people can come out sharing the gifts of their sexual orientation and gender identity. We suffer when LGBTQ people are oppressed, excluded, or shamed by religious people or anyone who overlook the fundamental call to love one another. Love does not exclude. We are all worthy. May we work to build a world where all people are celebrated and loved. Thank you. We'll now hear from the Tuesday Singers. Thank you. That was lovely. I am pleased to introduce our guest speaker today, Ted Lewis. Ted uses they, them pronouns and currently serves as the director of, oh, there's a ladybug, sorry. Currently serves as director of youth well-being for the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, the largest LGBTQ advocacy organization in the U.S. Prior to this role, Ted served as executive director of Side by Side and as the inaugural LGBTQ plus positions at the University of Richmond and UNC Charlotte. Ted has over 2 decades of experience advocating for inclusive policies and practices for LGBTQ youth and the larger community. They're a graduate of University of Mary Washington and University of South Carolina, where they received their master's in education. Ted is a former colleague, but more importantly, my very good friend, my first friend in Richmond, actually. And I'm really excited for Ted to be here to share with us.
I'm a little taller, so. All right. Well, thank you all for allowing me and my partner Jacob to join you this morning and for hosting this important service. Thank you, of course, to Elena and Alex and the rest of the Brooks Perkinses for their friendship and support, as well as all their leadership here. So I was asked to share a little bit about Transgender Day of Remembrance and to talk about sort of what we do in this moment. And I have been texting Elena back and forth because I said, usually when I give a talk, I try to give some jokes and some hope and some fun moments. And I hate to tell you that none of that is coming. So I apologize ahead of time if it's a little heavy today. With that in mind, I always like to give a little content warning because I am going to mention things like anti-trans violence, hate crimes, and suicide today. I also have to acknowledge that in this current moment, we're facing the wake of the most recent presidential election, where we saw an individual who has been adamantly anti-transgender in his rhetoric and his policy retake the White House. And many in the LGBTQ community are bracing for what that means for the next 4 years and beyond. But first, I want to talk a little bit about Trans Day of Remembrance. It was started back in the 1990s after 3 Black trans women, Rita Hester, Chanel Pickett, and Monique Thomas, were all murdered, all in Massachusetts in the late 90s. These women's murders brought the attention needed to really form a day to remember trans folks. And a lot of times people say, well, why would we have a day focused on death and dying for transgender people? And unfortunately, one of the reasons is in these women's death, they were misremembered and how they were talked about in the local newspapers, how they were even talked about in their local congregations, and sadly, sometimes even with their family. Many of you may have heard the term dead name before, which is referring to a transgender person by the name that they may have been given at birth, but is not the name they go by now. In part, the term comes from transgender people's eulogies showing up in newspapers using the name they were given, not the name they went by. So communities and members would say, well, I know Ted, but the newspaper said Amanda passed. That's the dead name. You'd only see that name when someone died. So every year on November 20th, we celebrate, or rather honor, Transgender Day of Remembrance. And many people and organizations, including the one I work with at HRC, have shifted to creating an entire week called Trans Awareness Week, where we, instead of just focusing on the sorrow and pain of those we've lost, try to raise awareness and funds and resources and support for all transgender folks. Sadly, this past year, we've lost over 400 transgender folks across the globe. And a lot of times people say that number feels kind of low when you're talking about the world population. But realize that it's estimated that transgender folks only represent between 1% and 2% of the world population. Not to mention that many countries not only don't count people as being transgender, but actually actively harm them, including sentencing them to death for being their full, authentic selves. In the US and much of Latin America, it is Black transgender women who are disproportionately impacted by this violence, and sadly, it often comes from intimate partners, romantic partners, and sadly, sometimes even their family. I'm going to give you a startling statistic, and I think it speaks to the reality that many transgender folks face, and specifically Black trans women who have to deal with not only transphobia, but sexism and racism, often mixed with poverty. In the US, the life expectancy of Black trans women is only 36 years old. 36. I told Elena when I was writing this, I was like, I don't think I'm going to make it through without breaking down, so we're going to get through this together. What happened the last couple years is a really scary trend. And what we're seeing now is transgender children being targeted with violence. Polly Likens was 14 years old and lived in Pennsylvania. She was lured out into the woods, murdered, dismembered, and discarded in a lake just this past June. Many of you may have heard the story of Nex Benedict, who was a 16-year-old non-binary young person in Oklahoma who, while at school using the bathroom, was badly beaten by fellow classmates. The next day, they were at the hospital, and the next day, they died in part from their injuries. I think Nex's story is an important one because it focuses on the reality that when we demonize a group of people, we also dehumanize them. And it makes it easy for us to discard them. It also sadly makes it easier for us to kill them because we kill things all the time. If you can make a transgender person a thing instead of a person, then we don't really care what happens to them. Nex's school district was run by an alt-right politician named Ryan Walters. And part of what he did is ban books on LGBTQ folks in public schools and public libraries that he had purview over. Some of you may have heard of the anti-LGBTQ group Libs of TikTok. The founder of that group, who has no education background, no library background, and lives in New York City, was appointed to Oklahoma's Board of Content Creation and Curriculum. And what we saw is those anti-transgender policies and that anti-transgender rhetoric lead to the brutal beating of a child. In fact, just this past Friday, the US Department of Education released its findings as they did a report and a study to see what was the cause of what happened to Nex, and they ruled that it was the school district's fault what happened to that young person. That it was the anti-trans rhetoric, the repeated demonization of transgender people that led Nex's fellow students to ostensibly take their life. In 2023 and 2024, over 1,000 anti-LGBTQ laws were introduced across the country. One lawmaker in West Virginia introduced a bill that would categorize transgender people as obscene, simply for existing, and make it against the law for transgender people to be in the presence of minors, not just in school, not just in their faith community, but anywhere. And that a transgender person who was caught around children would be arrested and charged as a sex offender, simply for existing. Politicians have called transgender people demons, have called transgender people horrible, obscene terms that I won't repeat here. You may have seen some of these bills, such as the infamous Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, which not only removed pro-LGBTQ content from schools and libraries, but actually required teachers to not talk about LGBTQ folks, even if they were asked. In Texas, the governor issued an executive order that said if a family is supportive of their trans child, it is grounds for CPS to remove that child from the home. In June of last year, HRC issued a national state of emergency for LGBTQ Americans. And as someone who goes around talking to lots of different groups, a lot of times I hear, isn't that a little dramatic? And I'll share with you that in September of 2023, the country of Canada issued a travel advisory to LGBTQ residents, telling them not to come to the US because it was no longer safe. The international community no longer views the United States as a safe place for LGBTQ people and specifically for transgender folks. A couple months ago, the FBI released its hate crime statistics. And while hate crimes have gone down overall in the US, the only area they are rising is in attacking people based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. The Washington Post did a study looking at hate crimes on K-12 campuses against LGBTQ folks, and in states that have anti-LGBTQ laws, they saw an increase of over 300% in hate crimes happening on K-12 school campuses. And even in states where there were pro-equality laws on the books, there was an increase of 100%. This past election cycle, Republicans spent nearly $215 million on attack ads specifically against transgender folks. Democrats actually almost never talked about transgender people on the campaign trail. And in fact, now there's a conversation happening about whether or not the Democratic ticket's support of transgender people was the reason they lost. I can tell you emphatically that is not the case. There's a lot of reasons why people decided to vote the way they did, but their hatred of trans people was actually not on their list. In fact, studies show that attack ads on transgender people do not sway people to vote a certain way. So don't buy into the narrative that supporting our community means we're going to lose the next election. Don't throw away a group of people just to get back in the White House. Trump, in his last term, caused significant harm to transgender folks. In a single tweet, he banned transgender people from serving in the military. Now, you, like me, may have complicated feelings about our military and what it does, but it is the #1 employer of transgender people in the US. And they were banned under Trump. We imagine that ban will resurface in his new administration. He also rolled back protections for LGBTQ students, particularly trans folks, in Title IX. There was a famous case of a Virginia transgender kid, Gavin Grimm, out in Gloucester County, who sued his school to access the bathroom that he identified with. And by the way, I had the honor of knowing Gavin, and I can tell you that he was using that boys' room and nobody blinked an eye until the newspaper told a story about it. No teacher, no parent, no one called to complain until it made it to Fox News. And that case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the reason it wasn't heard at the Supreme Court is because Trump decided to roll back the protections, meaning it was no longer a federal case. The US Supreme Court is about to hear one of the most important cases for gender-affirming care in the Skermeti case, and many of us are nervous for what that means for transgender folks in healthcare, especially in the wake of the Dobbs case that removed access to abortion and reproductive health. I don't think people quite understand that in removing protections in the Dobbs decision, the Supreme Court has now set a precedent that healthcare can be decided by judges, not by those in the medical field, not by your doctor. And while rightfully so, right now we are focused on what that means for women and other folks who can become pregnant, the impact is going to go far beyond that. And next up is transgender folks. When I talk about gender-affirming care, a lot of people get really nervous because they think I'm talking about a child having surgery. I'm here to tell you that's not happening. What is happening is life-affirming health care for countless transgender folks of all ages across the country. It's very difficult to access. It's often very costly to access. But it is life-affirming care. In fact, the American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, American Psychological Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, and countless others affirm that transgender people need not only support, but gender-affirming care. When you think about gender-affirming care, I want you to think about your own health care. My mom was shocked to know that she was receiving gender-affirming care when she started hormones after menopause. Hate to break it to you, hormone replacement therapy for cisgender women is the same as hormone replacement therapy for transgender women. People are shocked when they learn how many cisgender people access gender-affirming care to alter their bodies to feel more like themselves. And so if your concern is about the health care, I would argue, shouldn't that decision be left to the doctors? And if your concern is whether children are accessing this, I can again tell you that, one, it's not happening, and if it was to happen, the parents or guardians would have a say in it. But the threat we face right now is very real. And LGBTQ folks, particularly trans folks, are very scared of what's going to happen next. Right now, what do? Well, in our current moment, I would offer to you that we need to amplify our crisis resources. And Elena and the church was kind enough to print resources that are attached to today's service plan, order of service, thank you, apologies. And so you can see some of the phone numbers and websites. So when I say amplify, I mean go home, put it on your Facebook page, put it on your Instagram, send it an email, put it on a sign outside your house. The Trevor Project, which is an LGBTQ crisis line, particularly for youth, in the past 2 weeks has seen a 700% increase in calls. And so I also highly recommend you highlight 988 and some of the other crisis resources so that we can ensure LGBTQ folks, and particularly young folks, can get the help they need. The second thing you can do right now is to consider unconditional allyship and unequivocal support. And so here's what I mean by that. It does not mean you get to say, I love trans people and support trans people, but I don't think I can get they, them pronouns. It doesn't mean I love transgender people and I'll support transgender people, but I'm not sure about gender-affirming care. And this last one's going to be really hard for folks, but it doesn't mean you get to say, I love and support trans people, but I'm not okay with transgender girls playing sports. If in this moment your concern is whether or not a transgender girl has an unfair advantage in swimming, I have no other words to share with you, but grow up. If your concern is that cisgender girls will be hurt by transgender girls playing sports, you haven't met cisgender girls. People get hurt in sports all the time. I get the honor of working with organizations that work with kids a lot. And a lot of the conversations I'm having right now is whether or not trans girls get to play. It's making a shock to you, but I was not a sports person and still am not a sports person. But what sports do, and what I did experience as a kid, is give you a sense of community, make you feel like you're part of a team, give you something to work towards, give you physical activity. And I, for one, believe all kids should have access to that. And if your concern is around unfair advantages, I would only point to looking at Olympic sports and recognizing what unfair advantages exist that have nothing to do with someone's identity. Because you can't win the ski event if you're not ever allowed on the ski slope. You can't win the swimming event if you can't afford to pay the pool fee. You cannot win the track event if all you have is city streets and never a safe place to run. If we want to level the playing field, there are lots of ways to do it, but if your only focus is transgender girls or transgender women playing, then I hate to tell you that you're only being transphobic and not actually thinking about what fairness is. Now, some of you may be saying, Ted, why are you spending so much time talking about sports? Well, research shows that hatred of transgender girls playing sports is a gateway into hating transgender people. There's been studies that have shown that people who voice their opposition to transgender girls playing sports go down a rabbit hole that then pushes them to hate transgender people more broadly. I need you to be vocal and loud and on the front lines. I need you to interrupt transphobia in your real life and in the virtual world. I need you to celebrate trans folks, our stories, our media. And we're getting ready for some holidays for many people. And so I need you to have some uncomfortable conversations over Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, or whatever you may celebrate in the coming months. I need you to have those uncomfortable conversations with that uncle that you don't really get along with, the sister you haven't talked to in a couple years. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to go have meaningful, thoughtful conversations, not yelling and screaming arguments. And some of you are thinking, I don't know if I can do that. Part of what we're missing right now is the ability to have meaningful dialogue, to hear people's concerns and provide them information. $215 million was spent on misinformation and disinformation about transgender people. I don't have $215 million to fix that. I have $215 million, or even a little bit extra, moment to give generously and thoughtfully. I've given some suggestions in the document here, but folks that are doing direct service for LGBTQ folks is one place to start. Now, I would be remiss if I also didn't, of course, mention two big things that are happening right now, one of which is the reality that there is a ladybug up here. Sorry. One of it is that the reality right now is that while the danger for transgender folks is significant, the danger for our immigrant and refugee community is even more. And transgender folks, LGBTQ folks, are also immigrants and refugees. We saw what camps looked like under the previous Trump administration. They're looking to do that 10, 20-fold this next term. And when I say immigrants, I don't just mean undocumented folks. I mean people who have legal residence in the United States. And so if we talk about who's at risk, it is immigrants and refugees. It is women and those who can become pregnant. And it is transgender folks in the larger LGBTQ community. And what that's going to require of us is to get ready for what's coming. And part of that means we've got to fill the coffers. We've got to be ready to speak out and speak up, and we've got to be ready to do it together. In closing, I cannot tell you that things are going to be okay, because I know for many it won't. I can't tell you we're not going to lose folks, because sadly, we will. I cannot tell you that we're going to lose the fight, but I can tell you I'm not done. And I hope you're ready for what's next. For me, the last couple weeks have looked like a lot of screaming and crying, anger and frustration, fear, and even hatred for those that voted against my interest. And there's also been a lot of escapism, video games and TV, bad food choices. And this past Monday, when I went back to work, I realized that it was time to get up, get organized, and get back to it. So as I say, I hope you're ready for what's next. I cannot tell you exactly what that's going to look like, but I can tell you that it's likely to be bad. And if you're able, whether that's through giving your time, treasure, and talent, or simply being a kind person, a refuge for folks who are being targeted to go to, that's what's needed now. The UU Church has a long history of supporting targeted communities and individuals, has a long history of supporting the LGBTQ community unequivocally, has a long history of being out and proud in your support. And I need you to do that outside of these walls. When I worked at Side by Side, we asked the kids, what do you want to be protected? We were expecting them to say, we want more education, we want better policies, we want more funding. And they said, at school, the only thing I want is adults in the hallway. And for me, it was a aha moment. Kids are taking in what they see on television, what they hear on the radio, what's talked about at the dinner table, and beyond. For me, growing up as a little queer kid, the bullies stopped once I got home, and that was lucky for me. Today, the bully exists in the kid's pocket and is 24/7, 365. So you might be that person that comments and says, this isn't okay, that shares out resources that kid gets to see. You may be that person that lets them know they're going to be okay. And believe it or not, you might be the person that saves somebody's life. So I ask you with the bottom of my heart, cry, grieve, scream, and then get back to work, because we've got a lot to do. Thank you.
Ladybug has moved. It's part of the service. Please rise in body or in spirit for our closing hymn, How Could Anyone, which is 1053 in the teal softcover hymnal. We'll sing it through twice. In preparation for our closing, let's reach out to each other in whatever way we feel comfortable. When we go, let's keep our trans and non-binary friends in our hearts. When we go, go in peace. Leave this place knowing that you are good and knowing that you are loved. Take your dark and your light and your love from this place, share them with the world, and stay safe until we meet again. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Please enjoy our bake sale and coffee.
pick out bananas. I have to bring a child. Pick out the ones that are on the cusp of yellow and green. Yeah, so if they're hard and woody, they're green, and if they're turning black, they're yellow.